Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer. And today we're going to be doing something a little different. It's not going to be a book review today, but we are going to be talking about all of the books that we have read so far for the summer reading suggestions. We'll do this again later when I get further and we get more of them. But I wanted to talk about openings. And I thought that this was the perfect chance to talk about openings and first impressions and like how to establish or what generally establishes a good strong opening. And first things first, there are 1.5 million different ways to write a good story, a compelling entry, and there are 1.5 million, well, there are technically billions upon billions of individual readers with all different preferences. So what I say in this video is just my preference and or my observations or the way that I see things, and in no way should be considered any sort of catch-all rule for anything. But it is the way that I'm going to be analyzing the opening pages of these stories and how they bring the reader into them, and then my thoughts on those and what I think creates a strong opening. Now, you can take or discard or think about and then discard anything that I say to your life's content, to your heart's content, but I am going to discuss these and they're just my opinion. All right. Then now I do think it is important to know the form and the rules behind things in order to know how and why you're breaking them when you do. But that's a different thing altogether. Anyways, I'm going to set an established, like this is how we're going to look at it before we get into it. However, before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemoy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video, we bask in your creativity. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out, if you submit the first chapter and the cover, that chapter will be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work without bias, without opinion of mine, just rock them with your style. And then the third thing is I am considering starting a Crit This series where if you would like feedback on your writing from this channel, like in video format, and we can discuss craft together, there is now a link on my link tree to submit unpublished work. And that I've brought this forward because I've received a couple of books through the Fresh Meat feature that are unpublished or don't really have anywhere to go, and people requesting feedback as opposed to what the feature is, which is just sending people to books that are already published. So if you're interested in getting feedback from me, all of the rules are listed on that. If you have other questions about it, you can ask them below and I'll do my best to answer. We're going to see how this works if anybody is interested in it. If not, that's also fine. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, judge me, see if you think that I'm even worth listening to at all, or at least entertaining, whether it's for cringe or genuine entertainment, you can get my books anywhere that you can find books. And my newest novel, The Legend of Bill Cassidy, Book 1, featuring these three and then three others as the central characters. It is a Western epic. It's really gonna be, oh my gosh. I just hit 80,000 words again on the revision today. So we're getting there. I am hoping to be at the end of Act 2 by the end of this month, but we'll see because I got some major plans for the rest of this month. So it's like, by the time you see this, I'm in the midst of those plans. So, we'll see. But with that said, let's jump into this. So first, what I want to do is establish what I believe makes an effective opening to a story, all right? And there are many ways in which to do this. And even with the descriptions that I'm about to give you, there are many ways in which to establish, but there is no singular way in which to just create a compelling, interesting beginning. Though you will see that some people trying really hard with their very first line, but I'm going to assure you that the majority of readers do not put a book down based on the first line. Okay, so as much as people try to and emphasize that you need to make your first line this eye-catching, I think that many people put too much emphasis on that to the point that it becomes a cliche. And I cannot tell you how many times I've read books that the first line tries so hard to be edgy and mention blood or swearing specifically, and it's just like, introduce me to the style of the book. Don't try to be freaking edgy for the sake of being edgy. But that's a personal preference. Anyways, these are the things that I think make a strong, compelling, or interesting opening for a book and are necessary to create that draw to get people invested. One is the opening chapter needs to introduce who the character is. And I'm not saying like it needs to stop the story to give an introduction of like where they come from, what their personality is like, or any of that. What you need to see is this character in action, the character doing something. And so we get pulled into that world by seeing what they're doing, who they are, and what is around them. And this can also establish what are the norms. So when the inciting incident comes along, then we already know who the character is and have some idea of like what it is they're trying to do. And that is part of introducing the character, is we want to know what parts of their personality is. Like, we're not going to see all of their personality in the first chapter because it's the first chapter, but who is it that they present in their day-to-day that we are going to be introduced to? And it may even be like the day-to-day counts if they live in a crisis situation where like maybe it's a dystopian, maybe they're on a space station or a boat that is constantly dealing with crises, and so we're going to be watching that. Maybe they are in the middle of an adventure. Maybe they're just starting an adventure, but you're still going to get an introduction to who this character is just by them existing. And on top of that, as you're getting this introduction to who this character is, you're going to get an idea of what they want. You're going to get an idea of what they want. And often, if you get an idea of what they want, you're also going to get an idea of what the stakes are. Another thing that often has pressure on it for presenting, whether it's a synopsis or it's a pitch or it's the story, are the stakes. So the stakes are just what your character is possibly going to lose if they don't get the thing that they are trying to pursue or that they want. And many think that they need really big stakes so that it often comes down to, well, everybody dies or the main character will die. And that's fine. That's an okay stake. But the thing that makes a stake big is not literal big world stakes, it's how personal those stakes are. Because once you're dealing with personal stakes, well, now I'm personally invested. A bunch of faceless people being killed by shadow creatures at the end of a book is not big stakes. Like, it's a lot of people dying, but why do I care? I have no investment in any of them, just like the main character has no investment in any of them. I want to not to mention, when you're at the very beginning of a book, you're not going to be really referencing the stakes at the end of the book necessarily. Now you might, because your story might be like, there is an evil empire, and so this is going to be a big deal that is either the end of the society or the end of the government. So there are those options as well. Obviously, there are, like I said, a million different ways to do this. But you can also just have minor stakes that reference the future stakes. What I'm going to use as an example here is The Master and Marguerite, because we read that earlier this year on the Loin Stream Book Club, which is Friday nights. And the first chapter of that book introduces you to a poet, a man who runs a newspaper in Moscow. And the man who runs the newspaper in Moscow has hired this poet to write a poem that disproves or argues against the legitimacy of Jesus Christ. And so you are already getting, one, we've got religion. Oh, the last thing that you need to keep in mind with the introduction of your book, it also establishes the style in which the rest of the book can pretty much be expected to follow, right? So it's going to be like writing style, character style. Are we ridiculous? Are we over the top? And like, it doesn't have to go full on at the beginning. Like, is it going to be dramatic? We should see some ideas of drama. Is it going to be angsty? We should see some ideas of angsty. Is it going to be creepy? We should see some ideas of creepy. And this is why also when the first chapter has a completely different vibe than the rest of the book, it is so jarring. Gretchen Felker Martin's opening chapter for Cuckoo, for me, was completely different than the rest of the book, to the point that it felt like false advertising, and it felt like a completely different story than what was actually in the beginning of Cuckoo. But going back to The Master and Marguerite, we've got the poet, we've got the literary journal editor, and then we've got the devil, or a version of the devil, or an agent of the devil, however you want to look at him, who walks up and starts talking to them. And he has a weird accent, yet he is fluent in Russian. And so we've already got this weird juxtaposition of like this stranger approaching these two as they're talking about God and the existence of God, or the existence of Jesus Christ. So we know that there is going to be some religious discussion in this book, and the discussion of the afterlife, a test of faith. We know that there is going to be the devil, and we also have this foreigner guy talking about how these two are going to, well, one of them's going to die and the other one's going to be put into an asylum. So we've got predictions that are going to come true because now we've got stakes. So what are the stakes that are kind of put forward? This personal story of salvation, and that the devil is here and going to be getting involved with people. Now, The Master and Marguerite is also an interesting story as we're talking about establishing character and character norms, because The Master and Marguerite is an ensemble piece. It constantly changes groups of characters of who is being focused on. The most consistent throughout are the devils showing up in different places. However, there are consistent characters the entire way through. Again, the introduction of the book, both chapter 1 and then chapter 2, where it switches who you're focusing on, gets you this idea of the style, which is going to be a large cast to get used to. But the stakes are the thing that carry the book through, and the stakes are introduced through the devil character that approaches Berlois and Ivanovic. I'm pretty sure those are the two. I know Berlois. He's the one that gets his head chopped off. That's not a spoiler. It's referenced in the first chapter. But so you see what I'm saying. And it also shows the character norms, establishes the character norms when introducing Berlois and the poet, because they're meeting, they're doing their regular job. They have an established relationship by the way that they're talking to one another. And then they have an established culture in the way that they approach the foreigner and the way that they feel about the foreigner and how strange the foreigner obviously comes off. Now, this introductory chapter is going to tease the direction, if not be a prediction of where it may go. Another example, which I'm going to use my own books because I can 100% say this was the intention behind them, so that makes them easy to discuss, is like if you look at Boom Boom Boom, where you're introduced to Jan, who is doing his night job regularly at the one singular grocery store that is where he lives. And he talks about, the food being out of date constantly, that they only have half of the lights on at night to save money and save power because his boss is a penny pincher. You can already tell that he lives in an impoverished area, and that he also, I don't want to call him a slacker. He's a little, but because he's not really a slacker, but he's doing a job in order to do something. But you get this idea by the end of the chapter that he is doing something bigger, and the job that he is doing on the regular is just filling time, because by the end of the chapter you do see him go and do a YouTube channel video where he is making an explosion, and you see him doing the entire style of his making explosions, which has to do with consuming chemicals and then putting them together, and then his idea of the beauty of the explosions, of the colors changing. So you know what he wants by the end of that chapter. You know who he is by the end of that chapter, which is like this simple young man in this impoverished town in Ukraine who makes YouTube videos on the side, and that's his passion. And you see that he wants to make something of himself. He wants to get noticed. He's not noticed at all. He's got like 17 subscribers, if that. And he's very passionate about what he does. And not only that, but he cares about getting somewhere so that he can take care of his family, because he worries about his family. So you get all of that in the first chapter. And because his focus and drive and desire is on finding fame, then you know that that is where the story is going to go, and that it also uses YouTube heavily, so that sort of suggests that's where it's going to go. Now, it's a bad opening if it heavily suggests in one direction, and then it just, goes this way and completely ignores what it said in the previous direction. That is just, that's just bad writing, in my opinion. And what does he have to lose if he doesn't get his desired fame inside of YouTube? Well, he can't take care of his family. He's ashamed on his father. He disappoints his father. And that is so personal for him, because he only wants to make his father proud. He wants to make his mother proud. And that's something that carries over into the second Boom book, because he cares so much about his family, and that's all he's ever cared about. So when his dad calls him a terrorist in the first book, it hurts him greatly, because all he wants to do is make his father proud. And he thinks, this is what I have to do, and you will understand at some point, but that's not what I am. With Bodymore, you're introduced to Joey just doing her daily job, well, a job, as a mechanic going to collect a car. It just so happens the car that she's going to collect belongs to a close friend of hers, and that friend is missing, and you find a body in the trunk. So that immediately, and that's all in chapter 1, so that immediately establishes who she is, because she is a tomboy. She is doing her mechanic job. She is not a fan of the dark and the creepy. So you've got the stylization of that place, because she's in what is called Murder Park. It's introduced as locals call this Murder Park. Bad things happen here. People throw bodies here. She's very nervous about all of the noise, and she thinks she sees things in the trees while she is there. And you're just like, well, maybe she's just freaked out because it's nighttime. But it establishes the style as well as her. And then by the end of the chapter, you've got an open mystery of who is this in the trunk and where is her friend, because this is her friend's car and he is missing. And it's not him in the trunk. So you've got those things. And what is at stake if she doesn't find these things? Well, her friend is accused of murder. He may go to jail. He might be dead. She has to find these things out. So that first chapter establishes where the story may go and introduces part of who the characters are. Now, there are a couple of things, these are not sure and fast rules, but there are a couple of things that are often considered poor or very difficult starting lines, and I'm sure you've heard of them. One is dreams, and that is because they are a false start. A dream can establish a setting that is untrue, which is one of the reasons why it is so difficult to do. Now, there's no saying that starting your book or your story with a dream is always going to fail, because that's incorrect. There are great stories that do start with dreams. Just know that if you're starting with a dream, working it into being stylistically relevant or specifically thematically relevant to the desires of the character will go a long way in making it feel like it's not completely disconnected. As I was talking about before, if you write something in this direction and then immediately beeline into this direction and ignore all of this stuff over here, that's usually what annoys a lot of readers, because you just lied to the reader as an introduction. I also really, really hate when authors, personal opinion here, when authors don't have any faith in their book's opening, so they go to like the climactic moment in their book to write a prologue that is just like shrouded in mystery version of their later story, and then put that as the opening of the story, and then just go into something the actual opening, because they were like, I need to start with high action, and that's not the case. I've also run into stuff where authors do that, but then the high action moment that's referenced in the prologue is actually nowhere in the book at all. And it's not like it's doing a previous scene or something outside of time. It's like they started with something to be worked up to later, but then they just didn't do it. And it was just, it's annoyed me every time. What can also not really work is disconnected prologues. And a good example of this would be Will Jordan's book, Dark Harvest, where he's actually got 2 prologues at the beginning of his book. I think it takes up 10 to 15% of the beginning of the book. First one has to do with some Aboriginal girl in Russia coming back with a rock. And then the second one has to do with the Dyatlov Pass explorers getting lost and one becoming sick and then attacking the others in the tent. And they are immediately after one another. They aren't separated, I think, by anything but like a hard return. And then you go into Action Man in the Middle East. And so then those 2 items, which you could at least connect them as both being in Russia, feel completely disconnected to this over here. And that can happen, but I think the fact that it had 2 prologues and it said that it was about the Dyatlov Pass, and then it's not really about the Dyatlov Pass, actually made it feel completely disconnected. And that often, I think, also happens in movies, where thriller movies start over here and then go to Action Man. But I don't really think that it works with books, especially if it takes a lot of time up, because books take longer to read through as opposed to like a 5-minute scene at the beginning of a movie to then get to this guy. But again, that's just feeling like you're being misled, and that's on top of the synopsis that misled it. And then a third way that openings can be hard or difficult to start openings are the waking up and going through just like your regular schedule and nothing happens. So this happens with a lot of novice writers, where they will start the first chapter with waking up, brushing your teeth, getting dressed, taking a shower, going to school, and then just going through the day as normal. And establishing the norm, definitely important to show the catastrophe, if that's what you want to show, the inciting incident clashing with the expected. But doing a waking up and then going through the motions needs to be a deliberate choice to do. Like the Truman Show is going to do that, because that's the purpose of showing this day-to-day that is so controlled, right? So again, in all of these cases, you can make it work. And it needs to be a deliberate choice for the theme or the narrative of the storytelling, and it can work. But just leaning on it, knowing why, it can be boring and uncompelling. Like, you don't really know who this character is just by them going through the shower and getting dressed and then going to school and then coming home and then going to sleep and then thing. So establishing what is like different and specific about them as they go through their day is going to be what's more compelling than just going through the motions. Even with the Truman Show, you are establishing what is compelling by the way that it is so repetitive, if that makes sense. So with that said, let's go through the books that I've discussed so far on the channel, and then the last one that I'm going to discuss today is the one that I'm reading, so I don't have a review for it yet, but if you want to see any of the reviews, full discussions of these books, they're all available on the channel so far, except for the last book that we'll talk about. So the first book that we're going to say for the opening is To Hell and High Water by Celine Kapsaki and Beth Warburton. And this was a supernatural, I don't know if I want to say mystery, but it's sort of a mystery book where this guy named Vince is driving down a highway when he crashes, and then he wakes up just outside of this town, this abandoned carny town called Blackwater, and he is trying to get his motorcycle fixed so he can get the frick out of there. But some weird stuff is happening in there. And this book immediately does establish who the character is. And it gives him a desire of what he wants, which is to get out of this town, is he needs to get out of this town. You also have an establishment of the style where something feels off, where maybe you're not necessarily alive anymore because it talks about how quickly he was driving. And so you've already got the vibe of where this might go being some sort of purgatory. And it especially feels like a purgatory with some of the weird elements, like the mechanic looking like a doctor instead of looking like a mechanic having a stethoscope, you know, and it sort of implies from the way that it begins that it is going to be a more personal story related to Vince. However, then we get the more fetishistic stuff later where it takes the lesbian perspective to sexualize the lesbian's perspective just for a sex scene when there is no other establishment of those characters. And it doesn't really build Vince's relationship with these ghosts that are revisiting him here, but it started out with a strong sense of where it is and who the character is, and that he doesn't really know where he is at. And it also gives a sense of style. Stigma Play by Andrew Verlaine opens... Oh, yeah, you need to consider the trigger warning of this as part of the book because it's very tongue-in-cheek. It's very insulting to the reader because it's trying to be a satire that also pokes fun at specifically the reader for being stupid and wants to drag the reader into the story. And you know that it's dragging the reader into the story by the way that it also uses the second person for a majority or for all of the simulations, because it's got the third person overseers and then the second person, you're in the simulation, and it wants to subject the reader to the simulations. And it does a very good job of establishing what the stylization of this novel is, and that it's going to be more experimental, and that it's going to try to push you, and it's really purposefully going to drag you in. Again, the specific trigger warnings and the way that it mocks the reader with its trigger warnings is a way that it already tells you that it wants to drag you into the book. And it does follow through on that promise. Now, who does it introduce as the characters? It doesn't really do a great job of introducing who the player character is, as the player character doesn't really matter all of that much, and she isn't really established. She's just kind of there to have a reason, to have a you. The bigger characters that it is involving are the four overseers who are doing the science experiment, and the way that it introduces them is with character profiles as opposed to showing who they actually are, which again is another way to show the clinical style or the experimental style of this, but it doesn't do very well to establish like who they are as people and what it is they are trying to accomplish, what their hopes are, what their goals are, how many times they have done this, like what is the normalcy of this situation. And that's not asking for a stop the story and tell me these things, but it is asking for an establishment of what these people want. And even by the end of the book, you don't really have any idea of what these people were doing other than just being insane, because the whole story actually has to do with a conversation between the author and the reader. At least that was the takeaway that I had. If you go and watch this or listen to this or read this book yourself, Please let me know what your thoughts are, but I genuinely think that the characters in this book don't matter because the point of the book is a conversation between the author trying to show the reader exactly what he is saying, and then the characters in the book are just an avatar for the reader to wear so the author can talk directly to the reader. What are the stakes? There are no stakes because the characters are tools. The next book we're going to talk about is You Better Watch Out by James S. Murray and Darren Wearmouth, and this book was a dark comedy, Christmas-themed Saw, basically, in a small duplicate town that is just full of traps. And the book establishes its style immediately by being very quick-paced, very a close third-person perspective. I know I didn't even mention these in the other ones, but you know, some things just stand out more than others. There's not a whole lot to say. This is going to be a clipper story, and it also tells you that the characters are pretty much all going to be terrible because your main character is a petty thief of sorts, and he is eyeballing to rob an old couple inside of a convenience store. He's saying that he's going to change his life, but he's literally been doing this for like 10, 15 years already. So like, yeah, sure, you're going to change your life, ain't ya? And then he gets knocked out. So this establishes you with a character who is amoral, for one, and so that you're likely to have other amoral characters. It also sets you up with the style of the humor in the narrative, which is going to be a little off kilter, and you're either going to like it or you're not going to like it because it just is excessively sassy, which breaks a lot of the tension, but that happens. And then since the book, you know, has a knife on the cover, it is a thriller, it is described as a horror, and you know that it's going to get into a town of traps, then you know what's at stake, and it is their lives. They've all got to work together to find a way out of this place. And so what is mostly done with chapter 1 in this book is the establishment of the character that then gets him to where he is at, and that is getting conked out and then waking up in the snow. This successfully does that, and it gives you a direction in which the story is going to go. Now, does the rest of the story go well that way? You'll have to watch my review to see how I feel about it, or the discussion to see how I feel about it, but a strong introduction, which is the promise of the rest of the story, is completely different than the whole rest of the story, which is one of the reasons why I've started, when I'm doing my book discussions, is talking about, you know, the hook, the introductory of like, where does this book say that it's going versus the entire rest of the book and how that like lays out, because I think that's a very interesting thing to discuss, because the intro can be so different in its promise, and if you stop at like, you know, that introduction, that hook, and write down your thoughts and then see where it goes later and then see like how that compares with the knowledge that you now have, I think it's incredibly interesting. What are your expectations? How did it set your expectations, and how did it fulfill or not meet those expectations? Very interesting subject. The next story that we're going to talk about the opening of is Casually Homicidal by Olivia J. Bennett. And this is a story about two teenagers who are mildly maladaptive in different ways, come from very different styles of families. You get Hendrix, who is from an abusive, more economically poor family. His mother abandoned them. His dad is an alcoholic. And then you have Arden, who is from an economically very well off, one of the best off families in her town, apparently. But her parents and her brother are not really the family that she wishes she had, because she wishes that they were more attentive to her. She wishes that she had a closer relationship with them, but they seem to be treating her more like an adult than she wishes that she was. And I think that comes off more because she has a bit of a Peter Pan syndrome going on. But so this book establishes the style very early on, where it's going to come off as very angsty. It is compared to Gillian Flynn, or was compared to Gillian Flynn by multiple people that I showed some of the passages through, and it doesn't hide that it is going to go for that, you know, mid-2000s emo excessive description, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a very specific style, but it is going for the teen angst version of that style, where it is very excessive. And you get a sense very early on that all of the main characters of this, and there will be two main characters, are immature. Now, you do get a sense of who these characters are, sort of, early on, but it is the author telling you who the characters are, as opposed to the characters telling you themselves. And that's because there are multiple fourth wall breaks in the first chapter to then tell the reader things about both Arden and Hendrix that wouldn't be said if the characters were just going about their business and not trying to talk to the reader. And what is at stake here? We don't really know. because at the beginning of the book, we're really just establishing the norms. So this is an example of how you don't actually have to establish what the stakes are in the first chapter, but you do kind of want to establish what the characters desire and what will be the throughway into the stakes and what they want. And so we know that Olivia wants, I mean, she wants to be closer with her family, but she also kind of wants to live her own life because she doesn't feel like she's lived her own life. Hendrix just wants to kill somebody. Like, that's it. He finishes the first chapter by saying that killing rats isn't good enough. He wants to murder a person now. So you know that that's going to be where his story leads, is he's going to get into a situation in which would allow him to murder somebody. And Olivia is going to make a decision that will allow her to explore. And so obviously you can see how that's going to come together in their desires, bringing them to be in proximity to one another. Then what are the stakes? Well, if dude fails at murdering somebody, he fails at murdering somebody. I mean, he could go to jail, but he could also change his character. I don't really know what he thinks will happen if he doesn't murder somebody. I mean, he'll kill himself, I think, because he's like, I'm just so miserable. And look, I've cut myself a bunch of times and it was all to release the pain. So I think it's just like his stakes are, if he doesn't kill somebody, he's going to be so emotionally unstable that he either goes on a rampage and suicides by cops or kills himself. What are Olivia's stakes? Disappointment. I think it's mostly just disappointment because she's just disillusioned with life and unhappy with how she is and just wants to go on an adventure. So the stakes are very low, but it's a road trip. So that's what it is. The next book is The Butchering Art, Joseph Lister's Quest to Transform the Grisly World of Victorian Medicine by Lindsay Fitzharris. And the first part of this book, the introduction of this book, is the prologue, which quickly establishes the style of the book, which is not humorous, but not light and not dry. It gets into how much of the surrounding information, it's not just focusing on Joseph Lister, and that it makes very clear is, okay, this is a book about Joseph Lister, but Joseph Lister, this actually, if you think about it, Joseph Lister's book ends by saying how all of these other people in his life, including, you know, his father, his stepfather, his mentor back in London that sent him over to Edinburgh to study under James Syme, all of these people influenced Joseph Lister on his discoveries and on his encouragement that of what he pursued, and especially Louis Pasteur, who gave him the idea of the microbe and the germs, in which he started to solidify his theories with. And so it's interesting to think about that because this book makes a strong statement about how all of these people around Joseph Lister inspired him and were the people who brought him to where he was. And this book also does just that thing by starting itself out talking about a variety of surgeons, famous surgeons at the time, and also his being in, you know, the operating room with Robert Liston with the pre-anesthetic surgeries, and seeing that and how that even inspired him. So this book establishes early on that you're not just going to get information about Joseph Lister, but you're going to get a wide variety of information about many historical people who were involved even in the periphery of Joseph Lister. There are many that come out that are just like name dropped here or there and get a paragraph or two, and then how that led into what influenced or brought Joseph Lister to where he was going to go next. So it does an excellent job of establishing who the character is, what to expect of the book. We know what the stakes are because we're watching people get butchered on a table, and we also know that it's about antiseptic. And it just does an excellent job of setting all of the expectations for this book and what to expect from this author. I don't have anything else to say other than read this book. It's such a good book. The next book we're going to talk about is Buried Deep by Allison Miller. And it is a book about a dysfunctional family and a small town that is heavily incestuous with all of its crimes and involvement with one another, because it's just like everyone is involved with everyone else's murder. Just, I guess these small, like 8 people are all involved with everyone else, and you wonder how much murder is involved with everyone else in this town. But you're immediately introduced in the first chapter to Henry, who is the friend of the main father alcoholic, the patriarch of dysfunction, Rick, and his 2 children, Veronica and Jory, who have gathered because he is relapsing. They're living there. Kind of amazing to think, sorry, every time I start getting into this book, I start thinking of other details that I now know as I kind of go about describing it. but they've been there for a month since his ex-wife died, and he's been going through alcohol relapses. Henry is his AA sponsor buddy who goes to AA meetings with him, and this is the first time that they're meeting a month in, but they go to weekly AA meetings. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Anyway, this all starts out with establishing Rick lives in a trailer. He's an alcoholic. He's got a strained relationship with his kids because Henry walks in and Veronica and Jory are both on their phone, and the conversation is very cut, where it's just like, okay, I'm gonna go make dinner now. You staying? Okay, cool. And not even okay, cool. It's just, you staying? And then she walks off just like pan-faced. They immediately get into an argument. So again, you see that there is strain here. And the argument comes from Rick yelling at Veronica that she's not doing enough to support him as his daughter, when she's the one that purchased the house that he lives in right now, because he lost his own house from being immature. So she storms out. Jory immediately confronts Henry for lusting after his sister before he also gets into a fight and leaves. And then Rick shows Henry his daughter being a model. So we got all of this set up in the first chapter. It also establishes the style in the first chapter, which is very fast-paced. It is very minimal description, and the characters are all constantly going to get in fights with one another. If you take the intro with the way that they just do this, and then a new thing is just randomly inserted to create the drama of the next thing, which is Rick taking Henry to look at a 20-year-old poster of his daughter that's hanging in an abandoned mall. It's actually very descriptive of where the book is going to go, which is just constantly introducing new drama, random details, and having people fight and moving on to the next thing. Like, that's it. So it establishes style really well. It does establish the characters somewhat, though their relationships are all kind of questionable. It doesn't really tell you that the person that Rick is mourning is his ex-wife who divorced him 25 years ago. It keeps that really, really vague, and it doesn't establish stakes. But I think that's mostly because there are no stakes in this book. There are zero. Nobody wants for anything, and there is nothing to lose because nobody cares. It's like, you would think that because this thing is so decided by drama, that the thing at stake would be these relationships that you can't fix because you've messed them up so bad. However, nobody cares. There's no weight to what anybody says. So there are no stakes. And it just establishes the norm of they fight, they move on to the next fight, drama. And then the last book that will be discussed today, that will be coming soon as a book review, is The Hunt for Elsewhere by Beatrice Vine. And this is a story about a fox named Saxton. It's a children's book, and he gets separated from his family when they're running from hunters who have come to Montana. I think they're in Montana. Pretty sure they're in Montana. And he's still just a kid. He's still just a baby. But he stays behind because his sister falls behind, and he's afraid that the hunters are going to capture his sister, so he distracts the hunters so his sister can get away. Then it becomes a journey so that he can catch up to his family because they left him behind. Now, we obviously know what he wants. The stakes are he doesn't get reunited with his family. But one of the things that I have to question with the stakes of this book are, why does that matter? Because it's established very early on, I'm pretty sure it's even established in like the first, maybe the second chapter, that when he catches up to his family, well, his brother and his dad already hate him. If he takes too long to get there, he'll be old enough that he'll only be seen as an enemy by his brother and his dad, while his sister and his mom will still like him. And there's something also oddly incestuous about that, where it's like the Oedipus complex, where it's like, well, the girls will still like you because they can see you as a mate, but the dad and the brother will hate you because they'll see you as competition for the mates. And it's like, but if your choices, getting back to the stakes, if your choices are get with your family who hate you or be separated from your family forever, it kind of takes away the purpose of like, well, why am I going to cheer for you to get to your family when your family doesn't even want you? And they straight up tell you they don't want you. So I think it would have been stronger for this if they hadn't been established as having hated him, and they actually all just were happy that he was there. But once he got there, he was just, he wanted adventure. So he didn't need to be with his family anymore. And so he just went on for adventure. I think it really weakened it by making half of the family, and more importantly, the patriarch of the family, hate him so much that he didn't want to be there anymore. So there was no purpose for that stake. And that can be a negative context. That can be a negative thing if you add negativity around the pursued goal. Like, you would want to know why this character wants to pursue these and to be able to cheer for the character who is going for those goals. If you can't do that, then there's much less drive to see them get there, because it's just going to be punishment. You want to see it as a promised land of some kind, even if when they get there, they're disillusioned. At least make your character not know that the character is going to be abusive, so that they can wake up to this different way of being treated when they get there. Otherwise, we're all just going to be like, well, why are you pursuing this? At the very least, the kid could have been like, no, my dad's not like that. He would never be like that. And then to get there and be older, and then to see the change in the dynamics because he's older, and be like, wow, I hadn't expected this to happen. Instead, they were abusive before he was a younger adult fox, and they are still abusive and tell him that he is unwanted there when he gets there. So it's just like, and that weakens the opening for me. But so those are the books. I will link my Goodreads page down below to show the summer reads if you would like to check any of them out. They are also all available as book reviews on this channel, or book discussions, except for The Hunt of Elsewhere, which will be up next week. And if you're watching this video in the future, then it's already up. And with that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Have you read any of these books? Will you read any of these books? What are your thoughts on what makes a strong opening, or what makes a weak opening for you? What creates interest for you, and what creates disinterest for you? Again, there are no wrong answers. There's no singular way to do anything. And I would also invite you, if you so dare, to go into all of these books, any of these books really, if they tickle your fancy, and read the first chapter and give me your thoughts on the compellingness of the first chapter, what your thoughts are on the first chapter. Would you read more? Would you not read more? Why or why not? And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the establishment of these books through their first chapter, through their first impressions. What are your first impressions? So with that said, have a great weekend and don't die.
To my children, Tommy, Ike, and Annabelle, if you forget everything else I ever said in the lifetime we shared together, I need you to remember 3 things. 1. Minimize violence done to and by women. As givers of life, it's against their nature, God's design, to do harm, and every act of violence done to them is meant to break their souls, turning what should be a giver of hope into a black widow, a woman who destroys the life and the mercy of her care for no other reason but the corruption of her own self. It is only when you come across these kinds of women that you should put them down, for they are no better than the men who tarnished them. However, take no glee in what must be done. Finding any life so far gone, a black hole is where someone's heart should be, leaves only one solution: the mercy of death, and it's a tragedy when it happens. Make no mistake, a woman's love is the most powerful thing on this earth. It can start wars, end them, and change the devil himself into someone God sees worthy of giving a second chance. She don't owe this love to anyone, but she do carry it around with her so long as she's living. That is why the devil will do everything he can to pervert women's nature and destroy their innocence. Of every crime you can commit during your lifetime, be it out of daring or necessity, for every defiance you may act out against God, government, or man, avoid harming the innocent. For the day that we become bloodthirsty beasts where love don't exist anymore is the day hell on earth has come. And as bad as it may seem at times nowadays, we ain't there yet. 2. Everything you do in your life will create consequences, both seen and unseen, extending further than you can imagine. Nothing you do exists solely within your arm's reach. Think about every decision you make, every action you take, because you won't know how long your choices will stalk you, be them destructions or blessings, rumors or history been made. The truth of the matter is, your life will be controlled not by the truth of what you've done, but by the way others carry on about you. And the thoughts of others are more real in the long term than what you know to be true. It won't stop affecting you just because it ain't real, and no matter the life you've lived, most men can't outrun what's written in them in ink. It ain't hopeless though. Be firm in knowing who you are outside of the noise, and live beyond the means of the news of the day. 3. There ain't anything stronger than a family you build for yourself. What you put together is worth fighting for. Protect your loved ones with your life, and they'll give theirs in return. Family ain't defined by blood, understand that. And for as strong as the bonds of your family are, know that you'll find just as much passion in the people who hate you. While you'll risk your life for those you care about, those who find your existence to be an insult to theirs will risk themselves to put an end to their affliction. As cruel as it may seem, a man who hates you will stop at nothing until one of you is dead. It's a mistake to believe anything different. Don't let you be the ones taken from, be it by outlaw lawmen or by someone in between. The only one who'll be looking out for you is you and your kin. Maybe there's another way to be, but in all my years I've seen the worst of man, I ain't found another way around man's desire to conquer against all else. There ain't a changing of that mind, and sometimes I believe there ain't the ability for man to change at all, least of all through lead or legislation. I ain't claiming to be right about nothing. On many things, I don't want to be right, but what I do want is for my kids to live a better life than the one I did and avoid the mistakes that I made while finding the truth and purpose in what matter more than gold in this country. It's my hope that by sharing the things I learned that my kids will be better than their old man ever was, and that what I done isn't what people remember me for, but who y'all are going to become. That'll be the legend of Bill Cassidy.